This is Al Jazeera.
And live from Studio 14 here at Al Jazeera headquarters in Doha, I'm Fuli Batibo. Welcome to the newsgrid. Swept away by a tsunami, more than 200 people are killed after a volcanic eruption forces a massive tide of water into coastal towns on Indonesia's Sunda Strait. There was no warning and hundreds of buildings were destroyed. We'll explore whether such phenomena can be better predicted to save lives. Also on the grid, it should have been election day in the DRC, but ballot papers are only now arriving in the capital, Kinshasa. The delay to the vote, already postponed repeatedly since 2016, has angered opposition supporters. Can there be a credible election in a week's time? We'll have a live report. And 2018 hasn't been a good year for journalists in various parts of the world. One of Somalia's most prominent reporters is among a dozen people killed in a bombing in Mogadishu. And it's 2 years since our colleague Mahmoud Hussein was arrested in Egypt, imprisoned without charge.
The face of the U.S.-led coalition to defeat ISIL has resigned over President Trump's sudden decision to withdraw U.S. troops from Syria. But now the president says he doesn't even know him. I'm Andrew Chappelle with the reaction to that story.
You are with the newsgrid live on air and streaming online through YouTube, Facebook Live and at aljazeera.com. Thank you for joining us. It's been a relentless year for Indonesia with a series of natural disasters, including 2 earthquakes and now a tsunami. More than 200 people are dead and at least 800 others are injured, and the numbers are keeping on rising. The eruption of the Anak Krakatau volcano is thought to have triggered underwater landslides. Waves up to a meter high hit areas along the Sunda Strait between 2 of the country's biggest islands. We begin our coverage with this report from Al Jazeera's Dorsa Jabari.
A concert by the Indonesian pop band 17 in Western Java came to an abrupt end when waves from a tsunami swept away the stage, musicians and fans. The water flowed up to 20 meters inland, killing dozens and injuring hundreds.
Very little warning because there wasn't anything to give them warning. So there was like 4 different waves that came in, ranging from, under half a meter to a meter. So this could have been much worse, really.
Indonesia's Meteorology and Geophysics Agency believes the waves could have been caused by undersea landslides from the eruption of Anak Krakatau. That's a volcanic island formed over years from the nearby Krakatoa volcano. Search and rescue operation is now underway for survivors.
They're doing rescue work. They're starting to distribute family kits, hygiene kits. We have people that are trained in psychosocial support because it's a traumatic event, especially given all the things that Indonesia has suffered in the last 4 months.
In September, more than 2,500 people were killed by a quake and tsunami that hit the city of Palu on the island of Sulawesi, which is just east of Borneo.
Indonesia does sit on the ring of fire. There's always volcanic eruptions happening there. There are always earthquakes. Sometimes there are tsunamis. It's really no more active than normal, actually. It's just every now and then there's a confluence of events which unfortunately results in people being kind of literally swept up in these disasters.
The number of casualties from this disaster over a holiday weekend is expected to increase as rescuers reach affected areas. Dorsa Jabari, Al Jazeera.
And Al Jazeera's Andrew Thomas is on his way to the disaster zone. He's just arrived on the island of Java and sent us this update from Cilegon City.
Where I am in Cilegon is about 5 kilometres inland from the coast and about 17 kilometres from the part of the coast that's been hit worst by the tsunami. We're not down on the coastline talking to you from there in the dark because there are real fears that there could be another tsunami if this volcano continues to erupt, continues to displace water. That could create another wave, and authorities are saying that everyone should steer clear of that coast, certainly for now. That's why we're here. The good news, if you can talk about good news in a situation like this, is how close to Indonesia's capital, Jakarta, this tsunami has hit. It took about 1 hour and 45 minutes to reach where I am from Jakarta's airport, and it's a clear highway from the capital to the coast. And that has meant over the course of Saturday that many emergency Personnel and supplies have been able to get to that disaster zone and fast. The road right through Pandeglang, which is the main district of Java that's been affected, that, we're told, has been largely cleared. Vehicles can now navigate through some debris still, but they can get down that road. So help has arrived. But the bad news was the timing. Middle of a holiday weekend. Lots and lots of Indonesian tourists enjoying a night out, and this tsunami that came without any warning at all. There are no tsunami warnings for this sort of situation. That wave hit without any notice whatsoever, and lots of people there because of this holiday weekend, and that's why so many have died.
Andrew Thomas reporting there from Cilegon. Now, as we've been saying, the tsunami is believed to have been triggered by the eruption of Anak Krakatau. It's on a volcanic island by the same name between Java and Sumatra and has been spewing ash and lava for months. The island has been emerging from the sea since the 1920s. An earlier volcano in the same place erupted in 1883. That event was described as the explosion heard around the world. 36,000 people were killed in a series of tsunamis which followed as the volcano collapsed into itself. Well, let's speak some more about this now to James Goff, who is a professor of tsunami research at the University of New South Wales in Australia. He's via Skype from Southampton in the UK. Thank you so much for joining us. So this took people by surprise, as we've heard, because they weren't the earthquake tremors that usually precede a tsunami. A tsunami set off by volcanic activity. Just how unusual a phenomenon is it?
It's actually not that unusual. The problem is we tend not to focus so much on those because the warning systems are set up for large earthquake-generated tsunamis. But there are quite often little bits of the side of volcanoes falling off and generating small tsunamis. It's just that, invariably they tend to happen locally affecting areas, and those areas don't have people. In this case, unfortunately, you have the worst case scenario possible. You have a densely populated coastline, incredibly active volcano, and we also had a high tide. So you put all those together, and this is one of those worst case scenarios, and it's raising the awareness to people that these kind of events can happen from volcanoes.
Right. Are there external factors that influence the activity of volcanoes? Are we able to predict this kind of volcanic activity?
Oh, well, to a certain extent, you can predict the volcanic activity. I mean, you can tell that there's a bit of magma moving around, and you can sense very, very small earthquakes happening. But can you predict there's going to be a tsunami generated by that? No, that's a completely different kettle of fish, if you wish. Much harder to try and get a sense of whether any tsunamis are going to be generated by this volcanic activity.
Everyone's familiar, of course, with the infamous Krakatau volcano, whose eruption in 1883 was one of the world's worst natural disasters. At least 36,000 were killed then. But what about this so-called child of Krakatau? Just how dangerous is it for the people who live in its vicinity?
Well, it's clearly a very, very active volcano, and it's been active for quite some time. It's growing very rapidly. You put all that together, and you've got a lot of magma underneath it that's moving around. Clearly, you then have unstable slopes on the side of the volcano, both underwater and above it. It's highly likely that there will be more tsunamis generated by submarine landslides. The question is, when's that going to happen? We don't know. Are there going to be bigger ones? We don't know. What warning do you have? Well, it's an active volcano, and that's essentially the warning.
Yeah, and I read, as you say, that, in the years before the 1883 eruption, activity around the Krakatoa volcano was intense and earthquakes were felt as far away as Australia. So could what we're witnessing right now be the prelude to something even more catastrophic?
Well, Anak Krakatoa is a lot smaller than Krakatau was when it blew up, but that doesn't mean that it won't do something sort of catastrophic. More catastrophic than today, but it's really difficult to tell. I suspect that there may be one or two more submarine landslide surprises to come, but in all honesty, we just need to be aware that it's a problem and keep away from the coast, as the government is advising and the scientists are advising, and watch.
Thank you so much for speaking to us. Very interesting to hear your thoughts on this. Thank you for your insight. James Goff, Professor of Tsunami Research at the University of New South Wales in Australia. Thank you very much for your time. And of course, all the latest updates on the Indonesia tsunami on Aljazeera.com. The disaster in pictures. If you scroll down, you'll see just the extent of this disaster: destroyed houses and cars, bodies of victims being recovered, survivors being treated in hospital. Some very traumatic pictures, as you can see there, and videos also on our website to just show you the devastation that was caused by this tsunami. It's on our website at aljazeera.com. And we are getting a few comments from our viewers on this. Sabir here on Facebook, who says Indonesia and Philippines are often affected by flood, and Japan as well with earthquakes. Another comment from Maolo, who says our hearts are with the injured and the families of the victims. Of course, this is a story that's touching a lot of people around the world. This area of the world, of course, very much affected by disasters throughout the year, throughout 2018. Send us more of your comments on this and other stories that we're covering on the newsgrid today. All the different ways to get in touch with us on your screen right now. Your hashtag, of course, is at AJ Newsgrid. Our Twitter handle at AJ English. Now, it's been 2 years since Al Jazeera journalist Mahmoud Hussein was arrested in Egypt. He hasn't been charged with any crime since. His imprisonment has been repeatedly extended despite international calls for his immediate release.
Our colleague Mahmoud Hussein has now been held in pre-trial detention for 2 years.
What is his crime?
Why hasn't he been tried yet?
Why hasn't justice been applied in this case?
Is he detained because he's a journalist?
Has journalism become a crime? Have laws become a tool to silence voices of truth?
We will continue our news coverage with professionalism and impartiality.
Our work will remain credible and accurate.
But journalism is not a crime. Incarcerating journalists is not acceptable.
We demand the immediate release of our colleague Mahmoud Hussein and all journalists detained in Egyptian jails.
Free Mahmoud and all his colleagues.
We stand for press freedom. Well, earlier we spoke to Mustafa Swag, who's the acting director general of the Al Jazeera Media Network. He says the imprisonment of Mahmoud Hussein is a violation of Egyptian law itself.
Mahmoud Hussein is imprisoned unjustly and for no reason except that he is a journalist. So when you have an oppressive regime that doesn't like media freedom, that doesn't like journalists, and especially they don't like Al Jazeera because it has all these characteristics, then it's not an easy thing to deal with because the law is not respected and is not enforced. Actually, it's violated in every step. From the beginning, it has been a violation of the Egyptian law itself, of human rights law, of international law, everything. Mahmoud Hussein hasn't done anything. We have been trying to do everything we can. As I said, we have a lawyer that has been defending him, trying to do something, but they don't listen to him that much because he's in jail and he is repeatedly, this is it was the seventh time, I believe, last time, of renewing his 45 days of jail with no specific charges and with no presenting him to court.
Well, let's now speak to the daughter of Mahmoud Hussein, who joins us on the line. Azara Hussein is the daughter of our colleague Mahmoud Hussein. Thank you very much for speaking to us. Your father, as we've said, has been held now without trial for 2 years. Have you heard from him? How much contact have you had with him since?
For the last few months, we've been seeing our father once a week. We go there, sit with him for less than 40 minutes. And since it's only allowed for 3 people to go, me and my sisters and brothers have to change turns. So I end up seeing my father, or most of my siblings end up seeing their father every 2 months or something. So
you have been able to,
without our father.
Yes, you have been able to see him. What can you tell us, Azara, about his condition, his physical and mental condition?
Well, actually, he's mentally and emotionally choking because it's been a lot. It's been a lot. 2 years in one room. It's too much for one man, especially my father, because he was very social and he was very active and he was always with his family, with his daughters and sons. So every time I go and see him, his face is sadder than the last time. So it hurts me from inside to see my father like this. And the longer he stays, I can see that on his face.
Yeah. What toll has this had on your family, Azara? I imagine it's a very difficult time for you.
Yes, of course. Actually, my youngest brother was 2 years only when his dad was taken. Now he's turning 4, including 2 years without his father. He can't even, sometimes he can't remember his face, and he doesn't go that much because the prison and the visit is very hard for him to handle, wait in lines for too many hours. My grandfather and grandmother, all of them, the two of them have been sick, and even my grandfather has been paralyzed, from the shock. It's been like 11 months ago. He was with my father visiting him, and emotionally he was very distressed, and he went back home unable to move, and it's the same until now. So it's very devastating. It's ruining our family. I can't describe how hard it is for our family.
Yeah, I can imagine.
We are 9. Yeah, we are 9 siblings, and each one of us in a different stage of school and life. So everyone's life is paralyzed. So all of us, it feels like it's not only my father who's in prison. It's all of us.
Yeah,
we are all in the prison with him.
There have been calls and a campaign around the world calling for Mahmoud Hussein's release, Azara, from journalists around the world. What would you like your father to know today about, the efforts that are being made for him?
Yes, actually, whenever I see such events, I go there and tell my father. Of course, that changes, his spirit and his emotional situation. But actually, the situation here in Egypt is very hard. So you can't figure out really what's going to make the change. What's the point that this will all disappear and, life will go back as it were before. So yes, of course, all these events and, and solidarity stands with our father. It feels great, to have this support, but still we want something to happen. I'm scared that my father is going to be forgotten. 2 years is too much, and I'm scared that the number is only going to get higher.
What's your message?
Terrifying.
What's your message, Azara, to the Egyptian government today?
Well, actually, I don't know. I wish that I would speak to someone and ask him why. I only want to know why. If he had done something, why don't you give him a trial? Why don't you investigate and do your work? I don't know. I don't understand. Please let my father out. Please bring him back to us. Our life has been stopping. The clock doesn't move in our life since 2 years. So it's very hard. Please give us our father back.
Azara, I hope your message is heard. Thank you so very much for taking the time to speak to us.
Thank you.
Azara Hussein is the daughter of our colleague Mahmoud Hussein, who's now been imprisoned in Egypt without charge for 2 years. We've heard so many stories this year of journalists under fire just for doing their jobs. In Somalia, a prominent journalist was among dozens of people killed in a deadly blast on Saturday in Mogadishu. Andrew's here to tell us why so many people are talking about this case.
Oh, thanks, Folly. Well, this journalist's name is Awil Dihar Salat. He and at least 19 others were killed in bomb attacks in the capital, Mogadishu, on Saturday. Now, the armed group Al-Shabaab took responsibility for 2 blasts near the presidential palace. It's not yet clear whether Salat was specifically targeted in this attack, but the news of his death has gained quite a lot of attention on social media because he spent years working in Somalia, known to be one of the key figures in the country that was trying to revive the media landscape there. But he then fled the country in 2005, fearing that he could be targeted for that. Now, we heard from one journalist in Somalia. He says that he knew Salat and thinks it's very unlikely that his friend's death will even be investigated.
It's very dangerous to be a journalist in Somalia, and it is very unlikely that murders will be investigated. The authorities, the public, and the militants are all hostile to us. We are like a fish in a poisonous waters. We can be attacked or killed at any time. Yesterday's Yunus Act, a friend of mine, and a prominent Somali journalist, Awil Dahir, fell victim. And I'm really saddened by the tragic death of my friends. we Somalis journalists are facing regular threatening. Some of us are being killed, some of us are being wounded, others fled from the country. We are facing a terrible time.
Now, many of his colleagues and readers have paid tribute to him. One journalist wrote that Somalia has lost a great journalist and presenter. I've known him for over 25 years. My sincere condolences to his immediate family and friends. Another says Somalia needs every living Somali figure because the country is dying and needs all our efforts to help rebuild. Let's all protect Somalia. Abdi Rashid here says that these attacks are targeting Somalia's greatest assets, its students, its teachers, doctors, academics, and journalists. They deserve justice. And finally, a simple question from Mary here. When will this violence end? Now, the Committee to Protect Journalists describes Somalia as one of the most dangerous places for journalists, recording at least 65 killings there since 1992. And for the fourth year in a row, Somalia has ranked at the near the top of the countries where journalists are slain. And as we've heard earlier, their killers end up going free. 53 journalists were killed worldwide this year, according to CPJ, with Afghanistan being the deadliest country on earth for journalism. Now, if you're in Somalia, we'd like to know what you think about Awil Dahir Salad's death and what it means for journalism in the country. You can get in touch with us on Twitter using the hashtag AJNewsGrid.
Andrew, thank you very much. Why are journalists around the world increasingly targeted? Watch this edition of Inside Story for an interesting discussion on what should be done to reverse this dangerous trend, who should be responsible to protect journalists, and what can be done to restore the public's trust in news reporting. The show was recorded just last week here at the Doha Forum and featured former White House Press Secretary Sean Spicer, Filipina journalist Maria Ressa, and David Schlesinger from the Committee to Protect Journalists. Watch it on Aljazeera.com. Now to the Democratic Republic of Congo, where thousands of people, millions in fact, of people across the country should have been voting this Sunday to elect a new leader to replace President Joseph Kabila. But ballot papers for the long-awaited presidential election have just arrived in the capital, Kinshasa. They're needed to replace almost 4 million others, which were destroyed by a fire last week. The blaze in Kinshasa also left 8,000 voting machines damaged. There's been protests since the announcement that the election has been postponed by a week. Let's speak to our Catherine Soy, who is live from Kinshasa now. So, Catherine, the good news is that the ballot papers have finally arrived in Kinshasa, but that doesn't mean that the logistical problems surrounding this election are over.
Yes, Folly, you're right. It is a relief that these ballot papers have arrived. They were supposed to arrive yesterday, on Saturday. So a lot of people are relieved that this has happened. But there's still a lot of uncertainty in the country. We've been talking to people here in the capital who say they do not trust the Electoral Commission at all. They're saying that they fear that this election could be postponed again. They fear that another crisis might just come up. The Electoral Commission itself is under a lot of pressure to deliver fairly credible election, and we've had in the last few days the president of the commission coming out to tell people to exercise patience and that they're trying to do everything in their power to make sure that there is an election on Sunday and this election is fairly credible. But let me tell you where we are at right now. As you mentioned, those 4 million ballot papers meant for Kinshasa are in the country. Machines, voting machines, 8,000 had been destroyed in that fire. So the voting machines that were recalled from other parts of the country to fill that gap are in Kinshasa, and technicians are in the process of reprogramming them. Voting materials for other parts of the country are already in the different regional headquarters. They are to be transported to the different centers and eventually the polling stations. But as you mentioned, this is a logistical nightmare because this is a country that has very poor infrastructure. We are in a rainy season. Some parts of the country are unsafe. We have an Ebola outbreak in the east. So all these issues really complicating matters more.
So the opposition, complicated issues, but the opposition has nonetheless agreed to this delay, to this extension of the vote by 1 week. Have they said how they would react, what they would do if the vote doesn't go ahead in a week's time?
We were at when one of the opposition candidates was speaking to his hundreds of supporters, reacting to this news of a delay of the election, and he told them, yes, stay calm, let's wait for the 30th, let's see what the Electoral Commission does. But he's also told his supporters that should there be another failure, should there be another delay, should the Commission come back and say that we need another extension, that they shouldn't wait for a meeting such as what we attended. They should just go out to the streets and express make their voices heard and protest. We also spoke to other presidential candidates who are saying they're also watching to see what's going to happen. But the other question that people are asking is that even if this election fully happens on Sunday, how credible is it going to be? I was talking to a political analyst today who said that he doesn't think that the election is going to be credible. The Electoral Commission itself has been very not transparent at all. They have not said the whole truth about their preparedness for this election. And then again, we're just coming out of a very violent, very chaotic campaign season. So a lot of people that I've talked to saying that they are concerned that going forward, this violence could only escalate, especially if the election is disputed or if the Electoral Commission asks for another delay, Folly.
Thank you very much for that, Catherine Soy, live for us in Kinshasa. As you heard there, this is a very crucial election for the DRC, one in which the incumbent Joseph Kabila is not running in. One of the most powerful players calling for change in Congo's Catholic Church is Congo's Catholic Church, rather. Malcolm Webb has more now from St. Joseph's Church in Kinshasa.
In the Democratic Republic of Congo, the Catholic Church has clout. Nearly half of Congo's 80 million people go to its church services, like this one in the capital, Kinshasa. When President Joseph Kabila didn't step down at the end of his second and final constitutional mandate, the church stood up. Jonas Chombela was one of the key coordinators of the protests for democracy, which eventually led to an election being called for Sunday, 2 years late. 3 days ago, it was postponed again until next week.
Until today, we are aware of strategies to not organise elections. We are not surprised that we don't have elections, even though there was enough time. We were informed about the postponement of elections until the 30th, and we think that for 7 days, let us not burn the whole country.
The priest asks people to pray for the elections to be peaceful. The last 2 years were not. Dozens were killed by police in the protests. The Catholic Church brokered a deal for a delayed election to take place. When it was finally announced, more were killed during the campaigns, mostly at opposition rallies. But the government promises it's delivering democracy.
Le président de la République est celui.
The President of the Republic is the one who has brought democracy in this country. We've had difficulties organising elections on time, and the President is the one who is conscious of the fact that his 2 mandates are over. That's why the Electoral Commission has all the means to organise elections.
Since the Commission announced the postponement, there have been police and soldiers on the streets. Near the university, activists tried to organise a march. They were completely outnumbered, so they gave up. The Catholic Church is powerful here. It can speak up when others can't. And its political work's not over. People are now waiting to see if next week's election really will happen. A lot of people are wondering if the ruling party and the Electoral Commission intend to hold any election at all. Most people here say they want change. They still don't know if they'll get it. Malcolm Webb, Aljazeera, Kinshasa, in the Democratic Republic of Congo.
And if you get a chance, check out this great documentary by our team at Witness about the fight for democracy in the DRC. It's a story of 3 young activists who put everything on the line to change the political future of their country. To find it, just click on the documentaries tab at aljazeera.com and then click on Witness. You're watching the Newsgrid on Al Jazeera. If you're with us on Facebook Live, coming up a story about how some women in Madagascar are working to bring light to their village. And still ahead on the grid, the U.S. troop withdrawal from Syria, how Donald Trump's decision to pull out U.S. forces is worrying some of the country's closest allies. Do stay with us.
Antes do aplicativo, eu não recebia ligação, quase nenhuma para pegar reciclagem, para pegar um entulho, né? E depois do aplicativo, né, o pessoal começou a me ligar, aí tirar reciclagem, pegar entulho.
Já tem aí mais de 191 cidades do Brasil já tem catadores cadastrados, né? São uma rede aí de mais de 1.000 catadores que hoje, diariamente, estão recebendo chamados de pessoas que querem reciclar.
The headlines on Aljazeera and the stories trending on Aljazeera.com. The tsunami in Indonesia, of course, the latest natural disaster to hit the island. Top trending there at number 1 and 2. More than 200 people killed and hundreds more injured after this tsunami hit Indonesia on a Saturday. Also trending, Turkey sending reinforcements to its border with Syria after the U.S. decision to withdraw its troops from the Syria conflict, and Turkey's foreign minister criticizing the Israeli prime minister, calling Netanyahu cold-blooded killer. All those stories and more on our website at aljazeera.com. Well, America's Western allies are alarmed by President Donald Trump's surprise move to pull troops from Syria and its fallout. That decision has prompted 2 high-profile resignations from the Trump administration: Defense Secretary James Mattis and Brett McGurk, the U.S. envoy to Syria in the global fight against ISIL. The French President Emmanuel Macron has just responded to the latest developments. Here's what he had to say.
I very deeply regret the U.S. decision on Syria, and I would like to pay tribute to General Mattis and what he wrote in his resignation letter. I have witnessed, over the last year and a half, how reliable General Mattis has been. He has always stressed the meaning of what being allies was. Being allies, it's fighting shoulder by shoulder.
Well, let's get reaction from John Hendren in Washington, D.C. for us. John, Macron seems to be saying there that the U.S. has proven an unreliable ally. How is this likely to go down with the Trump administration?
Well, Trump himself is likely to dismiss Macron's perspective, but there are a lot of people in his administration and here in Washington, Republicans on Capitol Hill, who normally are on Trump's side of these issues, who also agree with him. There's been a lot of angst expressed on the Sunday talk shows here in the United States about Trump's approach. Dick Durbin, a Democrat, said, "We've now reached a depth of dysfunction that I've not seen in Washington." He said that he personally appealed to Mattis to stay in the administration and said that we counted on him to be here and stop this president from his worst impulses. The president apparently announced the withdrawal of U.S. troops from Syria, 2,000 of them by tweet, apparently without consulting his own defense secretary or Mr. McGurk, who at the time was meeting with Kurdish leaders in the region. So it was an embarrassment not just to American allies, but to people here in the government in the United States. So a lot of concern being expressed here as well, and I think a lot of sympathy for Mr. Macron's remarks.
Right, and President Trump has seen 2 major resignations, as we've said, as a result of his decision to pull out of Syria against the advice of his military leaders, John. Is there a crisis in U.S. strategy here?
I think a lot of people here would say that indeed there is. These military leaders feel undermined by a president who unilaterally makes decisions, announces them on Twitter without consulting his own leaders. Mattis, in his resignation letter, talked about the importance of building alliances like the one with France, and went on to say that the president deserved someone whose views were more in line with the president's own views. But implicit with that is that the president has not been a very good partner with those allies. He has been very critical of NATO. His move in Syria has made Russia and Turkey happy, but they are often seen here in the United States more as rivals than as regional allies, and it's upset a lot of the allies of the United States that he has done so without consulting to them. So there is a sense of something of a crisis going on here in an administration that is undergoing just one series of tumultuous events after another.
Thank you for that, John Hendren, live for us in Washington, D.C. And the president's reaction to McGurk's resignation has left some scratching their heads. Andrew is back with more on that. Sandra.
Thanks, Polly. Well, shortly after McGurk announced his resignation, President Trump tweeted basically that he didn't know the guy. He said Brett McGurk, who I do not know, was appointed by President Obama in 2015. Then he accuses him of being a grandstander for resigning now instead of next year. So this has made Washington, D.C. Twitter, if you will, explode for a couple of reasons. Ryan here posts that the idea that you would take credit for the defeat of ISIL and not even know who the U.S. envoy responsible for defeating ISIL is just insane. There are many, many leaders in the region, especially, who know who McGurk is. He helped assemble the 79-member coalition that countered ISIL. He brokered military aid and agreements with and between armed groups and governments who are in competition with each other. And by the time that Trump took office, that coalition he had overseen had taken back half of ISIL's control. They've now lost all but 1% of the territory they once held in Iraq and Syria. And just 12 days ago, Brett McGurk was highlighting the importance of the U.S. continuing in the fight against ISIL in Syria.
We have obviously learned a lot of lessons in the past, and we know that once the physical space is defeated, we can't just pick up and leave. So we're prepared to make sure that we do all we can to ensure this is enduring. Now, a sign of that, areas that we have cleared of ISIS, they have not returned or actually seized physical space. There's clandestine cells. Nobody is saying that they're going to disappear. Nobody's that naive. So we want to stay on the ground to make sure that stability can be maintained.
Now, several members of the former national security team, President Obama's team, have shared their thoughts. Susan Rice here says that this statement that Trump made speaks volumes to his commitment to fighting and degrading ISIS, as she says here, while the former director of the CIA, John Brennan, he tweeted that McGurk believes in the principles, values, and partnerships that define America. Donald Trump does not. But I must say, not everyone will be sad to see McGurk leave the role. Idris Ahmad here calls McGurk the architect of dangerous and short-sighted policies in Iraq and Syria. He's probably referencing McGurk's work with the George W. Bush administration. He was an early advocate for the surge in Iraq in 2007. Now, in an email to his colleagues, McGurk said Trump's decision to pull troops out of Syria came as a shock and left our coalition partners confused and our fighting partners bewildered. I worked this week to help manage some of the fallout, but I ultimately concluded that I could not carry out these new instructions and maintain my integrity. Now, let us know what you think about this latest high-profile departure from the Trump national security team. You can get in touch with us, as always, on Twitter using the hashtag AJNewsGrid.
Thank you for that, Andrew. And the impact of President Trump's decision is being felt on the ground in Syria. Aljazeera's Zena Hodder has this report from the Turkey-Syria border.
Turkish military reinforcements are being sent deep into Syria, to the front lines north of the city of Manbij. The message Turkey is sending is that it's ready to use force if Manbij is not handed over to what it calls its rightful owners. The Turkish deployment followed reports that the Syrian army planned to move in. There will be a vacuum once the U.S. begins withdrawing its troops from areas across northeastern Syria controlled by the Syrian Kurdish armed group, the YPG.
People are afraid after reports of a possible military operation and other reports that the regime wants to capture the city. We're preparing to escape if the regime enters or if there is military action.
The U.S. military and what is known as the Manbij Military Council are the forces on the ground. But the Turkish government and the Syrian opposition say the council is a front for the YPG, a group they consider terrorists and separatists who have exploited the fight against ISIL to carve out a state of their own. Manbij is among predominantly Arab areas under YPG control. Damascus has been making its position known. State media has been broadcasting images from the YPG-controlled region of what it says are protests against a possible Turkish offensive. The government has accused Turkey of territorial ambitions.
Turkey's main objective in Syria is to prevent the establishment of a Kurdish state along its borders, so as not to inflame separatist sentiment among its own Kurdish population. It's not clear if Turkey will accept the YPG's rule to be replaced by that of the Syrian government, but if it does, it will demand guarantees that the YPG is rendered ineffective.
Turkey's president has promised to drive ISIL and the PYG from Syria. His military has changed its posture, strengthening Turkey's hand as Syria's players likely engage in backdoor negotiations to prevent what could be a new conflict. Zena Hodder, Aljazeera, on the Turkey-Syria border.
Let's take a look at some of the other stories making headlines around the world now this hour. And it's been another day of demonstrations in Sudan, protests that have at times turned violent. 10 people have been killed since Wednesday. The protests began over the rising cost of food and fuel, but have grown into a movement aimed at forcing the end of President Omar al-Bashir's nearly 30-year rule. Doctors are now warning that they're planning an indefinite strike. Hiba Morgan has the latest from Sudan's capital, Khartoum.
It may all seem calm here in the Sudanese capital, Khartoum, but the doors of the school behind me tells of a different story. It tells the story of a country that has been forced to issue a nationwide suspension to schools, high schools and universities to try to prevent people from congregating because they're worried that there would be further protests on top of the 5 days of protests that it's already witnessing. Over the past few days, people have been going out to the streets. They've been complaining and protesting against the rising prices of market commodities, against the fact that the government has been planning to increase the price of a loaf of bread from 1 Sudanese pound to 3 Sudanese pounds, which to them is already unaffordable, and they don't want to see more price hikes. But they've also been protesting about the government and its economic policies and reforms.
The economic situation in Sudan and deteriorating living conditions and high prices. No bread, no fuel, no medicine. All that has led to the protests in different parts of the country. The protests have been going since Wednesday, and more cities are joining every day. It'll grow. Our demand as Sudanese is no longer improved economic conditions. It's now a demand for the government to step down.
The situation is suffocating. One leaves the house in the morning and doesn't know if he should go to the bank or stand in the line for bread or go to work because there is no transport. Things have become suffocating.
At least 10 people have been killed, dozens have been injured, and dozens more have been imprisoned. Now the government is saying that they're going to try to find for ways, they're going to look for ways to try to ease the country out of this crisis. But the people have been saying that they don't want this government, they want a new government, they want new policies, they want new faces to take lead, and that they're not going to stop protesting until they have better living conditions guaranteed for them.
A UN team meant to monitor the ceasefire in Yemen has arrived in rebel-held Sana'a, the capital, after landing in the government-controlled city of Aden earlier. They're expected to travel to Hodeidah in the coming hours to monitor the withdrawal of fighters from the port city. Saudi Emirati-backed coalition forces and Houthi fighters have agreed to a truce in Hodeidah. It's hoped the end of fighting will improve the country's dire humanitarian situation. Cuba's National Assembly has agreed on the wording of a new draft constitution. A referendum will be held in February on whether it will be passed into law. The major change is that Cubans' right to own private property would be recognized. The update would maintain the country as a centrally planned economy ruled by a single communist party. After pressure from the Catholic Church, plans for legalizing same-sex marriage have been removed. Mexico's new president is facing a backlash against the decision to cut the salaries and perks of the country's top government earners, including himself. At the same time, Andrés Manuel López Obrador has lifted Mexico's minimum salary by 16%, the biggest single increase in more than 20 years. John Holman has this report from Mexico City.
It all started with this from Mexico's new president.
We can't have a rich government and poor people. That's why the government's top salaries are going down.
He's practicing what he preaches, slashing his own salary by more than half and forcing others in the public sector to cut theirs too via next year's budget. López Obrador's Morena party has majority in Congress and is backing his plans. Deputies and senators have reduced some of their own lucrative perks.
I think it's necessary that we have an equilibrium between what a public servant and working person earns. Many have said that it's about training, and we don't argue with that. But a construction worker or night guard works longer and harder.
It isn't all cuts. The president's promising raises for the lowest paid public sector workers, those who earn less than $1,000 a month. But not everyone's on board with the changes. More than 5,000 civil servants have launched legal appeals. The Supreme Court's also waded in, temporarily suspending cuts for the judiciary and some other institutions. But critics say the judges themselves are part of Mexico's gaping wage inequality. They earn around 17 times that of the average worker. This measure from the president's caused a lot of debate from here in Congress down to the streets, where a lot of people are really happy at what they see as an entitled political class and public sector are finally going to get their salaries slashed. Other people say this could open the door to corruption and a brain drain to the private sector. Anti-corruption experts say cutting the most exorbitant salaries is needed, but applying the measure across the board could backfire.
The consequences of cutting everyone's salary is that, even though it's a noble aim to slash the pay of high-level bureaucrats, the medium and low-level ones, who are specialists and technicians, aren't going to have enough incentives to stay in public office and make the changes we need.
There are also worries that instead of taking the hit themselves, those at the top could fire employees or trim their benefits to fit the shrinking budget. It's now up to the new administration to check that good intentions do turn into palpable change. John Holman, Aljazeera, Mexico City.
And former British politician Paddy Ashdown, who was a leading figure in the peace process after the Balkans War, has died following a short battle with cancer. He was 77 years old. The former soldier also worked to uncover war crimes committed during the conflict in Yugoslavia. Katia Lopez-Horoyan reports.
There were many terrible deeds.
He was a towering force in British politics, credited with making the Liberal Democrats Britain's third biggest party.
Try harder, Mr. Ashdown.
A conviction politician, he devoted himself tirelessly to centrist politics for more than a decade, and was admired across the political spectrum for his powerful oratory.
Is it not now perfectly clear that what the government has to offer the country is not a continuation of the cure, it's more of the poison?
Born in India and raised in Northern Ireland, he later served in the Royal Marines and Special Services. His influence went beyond Britain, becoming the UN's High Representative for Bosnia and Herzegovina in 2002, where he investigated war crimes, including the massacre of more than 8,000 men and boys in the town of Srebrenica. During the conflict in Yugoslavia, he was a forceful advocate for international intervention. He would later give evidence at the trial of the former Serbian leader, Slobodan Milosevic. He retired from politics in 2001, but remained a prominent voice, campaigning vigorously against Brexit. "It's not my job to be popular," he once said. "I'm goal-driven. My job is to get results." Katia Lopez-Odoyan, Al Jazeera.
All right, you're watching the News Grid. Coming up after this short break, all the sports, and a basketball legend meets one of the rising stars of world football. And even though they don't speak the same language, they have lots in common, as we'll find out with Joe in just a moment. But first, a check of the world weather. All right, time for sports now. Here's Joe, and it's been quite a week for Manchester United, but their fans are smiling again.
Absolutely, Folly. Yeah, ups and downs. This man, Ole Gunnar Solskjaer, put a smile back on the faces of millions of Manchester United supporters on Saturday. He was appointed as United's caretaker manager on Wednesday, following Jose Mourinho's sacking, and he made the dream start. The Norwegian, who played for United in the 1990s noughties, led them to a 5-1 victory over Cardiff, who he actually used to manage a few years ago. And it was the first time since Alex Ferguson's reign at the club that United have scored 5 goals in a match, although they're still down in 6th in the Premier League standings, with some work to do to catch the top 4.
The attitude's been fantastic, the dressing room, the way they approach this game, just throughout, because it's been a difficult week for everyone, and to get the focus and perform as well as they did, impressed. We're 8 points behind, and we've caught up teams before at this club. Now, though, we've got to catch up a couple. So, well, our job is just to take one game at a time. They don't look too far ahead.
Of course, Manchester United have been one of the top trending sports topics online all week, and lots of people have shared their thoughts after the Cardiff game, including Jesse Lingard, who said it was an enjoyable day at the office. He scored 2 goals and was named man of the match. Now, Solskjaer has only been given the manager's job on a temporary basis, and United say they'll get a new permanent boss at the end of the season, but former Tottenham midfielder Jermaine Genius thinks they should sign him up right now. Former United goalkeeper Peter Schmeichel told British media today that he'd consider applying for the vacant director of football role at the club. And he was full of praise for Solskjaer, saying that he brought the United spirit back. Now, the hashtag PogBack is one some of you have also been using. After Paul Pogba made a return to the United starting lineup, and Pogba himself shared this celebratory gif. He was regularly omitted from the first 11 by Mourinho, despite having cost United over $100 million to buy. From a team looking to rebuild to one that's going from strength to strength now. The Baltimore Ravens were another top trend after their latest win in the NFL puts them on the brink of a first playoff spot in 4 years. They beat the LA Chargers, and it's largely thanks to this guy, debutant Lamar Jackson. He became the starting quarterback, and the Ravens have also just extended the contract for coach John Harbaugh to a 12th season. With team talks like this one, it is easy to see why.
All right, first of all, it's a short week. Good. Yeah, that's exactly right. Good. We got to fly 6.5 hours out here to the West Coast. Good. We got a plane with no Wi-Fi. Good. Hell no. We need Wi-Fi. We still got one more win to get punched through. But once again, our backs were against the wall. Nobody thought we'd come out here and win, right? Except who? Us.
Like Coach said, nobody gave us a chance. We were the only ones that believed in ourselves. Let's continue to do this thing. Ravens on 3. 1, 2, 3.
Now, what do you get when you put basketball legend LeBron James in the same room as young French football star Kylian Mbappe? The answer is a fascinating conversation. The two may not share the same language, but they still have plenty in common. At a sponsors event in Paris, both say they're aware of the power they yield in influencing the next generation.
What means more than an athlete?
More than an athlete means is that you should never allow people to put you inside of a box. And for me, being more than an athlete, I've been able to be great in my community and giving back to my community, being able to be outspoken and be able to lead the next generation, letting them understand how important their voice is, how powerful their voice is.
Le plus grand, c'est une inspiration pour tous les gamins qui se lèvent le matin. Tout le monde te regarde, tout le monde s'inspire de toi, tout le monde veut être comme toi. Donc tu influes sur la société. Donc c'est ça être plus qu'un athlète. Moi, j'ai envie que d'autres enfants aient cette chance-là. Je veux que tout le monde parte sur le même pied.
We know everything that these kids are going through because we were them at some point. I want them to be able to have someone that they can look up to and also have someone that they know that care about them.
Aider les gens, surtout les gens qui viennent de là où tu as été élevé, que tu as grandi, ça c'est important. Tout le monde ne peut pas réussir, mais au moins de se dire que voilà, j'ai fait ça pour eux. J'ai mis ma notoriété au service de quelque chose, elle a profité à quelque chose.
We change culture. What we do, what we say, how we perform, we change culture. So we have definitely the right and the power to be able to do more than play football, play basketball.
There's not many 18-year-olds that I can sit next to and have a great conversation. He's not a regular 18-year-old, I'll tell you that.
All right, well, first, a huge thanks to Helen, our sports producer, who's leaving us today. Peter will be back with more at 1800 GMT, but for now, it is back to Folly.
Thank you very much, Joe, and thank you to Helen as well. That will do it for today's News Grid. Remember to keep in touch with us on social media at all times. The hashtag as ever, AJ News Grid, and all the other ways to get in touch here, including our WhatsApp number. From me, Folly Batibo, and the whole News Grid team, thank you for watching. We'll see you again tomorrow at 15 GMT. Bye for now.